During a storm that knocked out the power to the north wing of St. Elora Memorial Hospital, 5 people claimed to have witnessed something impossible. All the dead patients from the ICU were gathered standing up, motionless, surrounding the empty stretcher of bed 4, as if waiting for someone to arrive. A doctor, a nurse, a technician, a psychiatrist, and a janitor. They all saw it. But they didn't coordinate their story. And now, 2 weeks later, one of them has disappeared. What happened that night is told only in whispers, and the camera recordings vanished. But they all agree on one thing. They were not dreaming. The most disturbing part was not seeing the dead standing up, but hearing one of them whisper. Every person who witnessed the scene guarantees they heard their own name called by a familiar voice. The patients weren't looking anywhere, until, at the same time, they all turned their faces toward the living. One of them spoke. And, in that instant, time seemed to stand still. Only no one remembers what the phrase was. No one. Except Helen Granger, who has stopped speaking since then. And since that night, the ICU of St. Elora Memorial Hospital was never used again. Hey, how's it going? If this introduction has already sent a chill down your spine, take a moment and leave a like down below to strengthen the channel. Stories like this take a lot of work to research and edit, and your thumbs up is what makes our work reach more people who, like us, can't sleep without a good mystery. TMJ. St. Elora Memorial Hospital, in rural Missouri, was always known for its intensive care unit, modern, silent, reliable. The North ICU, however, was different. There, even when the monitors weren't beeping and the patients were sedated, there was something unsettling, an uncomfortable stillness, as if the place knew too much. Dr. Ethan Moore, 41, was the head physician of the unit, a methodical man, pragmatic and respected for his ability to maintain calm in any situation. He believed in nothing beyond science, until the night of the storm. In the preceding weeks, the ICU was going through an unusual sequence of deaths. Clinically stable patients suddenly suffered inexplicable collapses. Rachel Ayers, 38, a dedicated and emotionally exhausted nurse, began noticing strange patterns. The same times, the same whispers coming from the monitor of bed 4, which even when empty, sometimes blinked as if someone were there. When she mentioned this to Dr. Ethan, he dismissed it as exhaustion. But the seed of doubt was planted. That Friday, a storm was approaching, and the staff was reduced. The hospital was on alert, but no one imagined that the true collapse wouldn't come from the flooded streets or the power outage. It would come from within. While thunder echoed outside, a tension took over the wing. Janitor Helen Granger, 61, a reserved woman known for feeling things, took longer than usual cleaning the hallways. She would stop sometimes, staring at closed doors. Jared Collins, 27, a nursing technician and the youngest on the team, felt the electricity in the air. But not just because of the storm. There was something there, something preparing to be seen. The storm hit St. Elora Memorial around 10:17 p.m. A dry crack preceded the blackout, and for a few seconds, the ICU wing plunged into complete darkness. The emergency generators kicked in, but only a portion of the essential systems was restored. Security lights flickered, and the monitors returned with a delay, emitting more spaced-out beeps, as if the devices themselves were taking a deep breath. Dr. Ethan Moore kept calm. He knew the protocols well. He asked Rachel Ayers to manually check the patient's vital signs, while Jared Collins went through the rooms to ensure the ventilators were operating correctly. However, it was Helen, the janitor, who made the first comment that caused chills. "They don't like the dark," she murmured while closing the equipment room door. No one replied. On the opposite side of the wing, Dr. Lisa Ferrel, 49, was on psychiatric call. She had come to check on a patient with a history of outbursts following brain trauma. But upon realizing the electrical failure, she decided to remain in the wing. She was skeptical, but sensitive to details, and she noticed that the hallways seemed longer, as if space had stretched with the absence of light, as if someone could be walking between the rooms without being seen. It was then that Jared noticed. The curtains of bed 6, where the last patient had passed away hours before, were closed. He was certain he had left them open. Approaching, he hesitated. Behind the fabric, there was a motionless silhouette, a hunched figure. But upon pulling the curtain, there was no one, just the empty mattress, and a muffled sound, like a sigh, or a voice, saying something he couldn't understand. What no one knew yet is that the power failure hadn't simply shut off the machines. It had opened the wrong door. If you too have ever felt that certain places carry a presence that cannot be explained, leave a like on this video. Believe me, it helps us continue bringing accounts like this. Man, seriously? This part about Bed 6 is bizarre. If you dropped in here by chance and enjoy this atmosphere of real mystery and dark accounts, subscribe to the channel right now and join the family. We bring cases like this every week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next, because things are only going to get tenser from here on out. Jared Collins walked down the hallway, trying not to show the fear that was beginning to insinuate itself behind reason. He was young, but experienced enough to know that, in that wing, absolute silence was never a good sign. Still, what he heard wasn't silence. It was a faint noise, a kind of wet whisper, like dry leaves being dragged by a wind that didn't exist. While checking room 8, he felt a vibration in the air, a sudden pressure that seemed to come from the floor itself. Then he heard it, clearly. 3 slow knocks coming from the direction of the lobby. He turned, only to see the emergency light flickering. And in the brief interval of shadow, a crawling voice pronounced his name, twice, with wrong intonation, as if it were learning to speak, as if testing the sound of the name before swallowing it. Jared. Jared. His stomach constricted. The sound came from inside the wing, not from the radio nor the hallway. It was between the beds, but there was no one there. He took 2 steps back, trying to understand what he had heard. When he turned around, he noticed the figure of Helen Granger standing at the end of the hallway, motionless, looking directly at him with wide eyes. She said nothing. She just slowly raised her hand and pointed to the medical staff meeting room. The door, which usually remained locked at night, was open. Inside, by the reddish light of the auxiliary generator, there were shadows in motion. Not doctors, not nurses, but patients, the ones who had died in the last few days. Jared knew all those faces, some still with imaginary tubes attached to their faces. They were sitting in a circle, as if waiting for something to begin. His heart raced. He blinked, and everything vanished. The hallway was empty, the room dark. Only Helen was still there. And she said, without moving her lips, "You heard your name. Now you have to hear theirs." Dr. Ethan Moore arrived minutes later, alarmed by the call over the internal radio made by Rachel Ayers. She spoke with a trembling voice, stating that Jared had fainted near the meeting room, and that something was wrong with the wing's cameras. Upon arriving, he found the young technician sitting on the floor, pale, a vacant stare, as if trapped in another reality. Jared said nothing, just repeated in a low voice, "They were waiting for me." Lisa Ferrel, the psychiatrist on call, appeared shortly after, attracted by the silent chaos. She tried to talk to Jared, but backed off upon realizing he was reacting as if listening to voices no one else heard. Meanwhile, Helen Granger was standing a few meters away, staring at the meeting room with an absent expression, murmuring something to herself about those who return with the storm. Ethan entered the meeting room. The air was different, cold, motionless, almost too dense to breathe. The chairs were arranged in a circle, and although they were empty, he had the distinct impression that someone had just stood up from there. The heart rate monitor hanging on the wall, shut off for years, was flickering with a faint sound. Beep, beep, beep. It was impossible. Lisa then suggested reviewing the internal cameras. Upon accessing the wing's surveillance system, they noticed something even more unsettling. In the interval from 02:17 a.m. to 02:34 a.m., all the recordings were corrupted. The screen displayed only static, and a background sound similar to static, but with almost vocal variations. When they turned up the volume, they clearly heard names, one by one, including Ethan Moore's. Rachel stepped away from the screen, hand over her mouth. Helen murmured, "They gather before the final call." By the way, take this opportunity right now to subscribe to the channel if you like real stories, bizarre ones, and often ignored by science. every week, a new case like this one. Rachel Ayers, still trying to recover from the shock of the corrupted images and the names whispered in the system, walked alone to the end of the North Wing hallway, guided by an instinctive feeling that something had changed there. The emergency generator made the lights flicker slightly, casting intermittent shadows along the damp walls. She stopped in front of an old medical equipment room, deactivated for months. The doorknob was hot, too hot. She pushed the door open cautiously. The air inside was dense, heavy with an acrid odor, like burnt wire mixed with a faint smell of aged hospital alcohol. In the center of the opposite wall, something caught attention. Carbonized marks, black and deep, forming the irregular outline of a human figure in a sitting position, as if someone had burned until disappearing, but without leaving a body. Around the mark, circular inscriptions, like frenzied scribbles of overlapping words in different languages. Latin, Old English, something that looked like Aramaic. Dr. Ethan Moore arrived shortly after, notified by Rachel over the radio. He examined the wall with perplexity, touching the blackened material with gloves. The room's smoke detector had been torn from the ceiling, but no alarm went off. There was something symbolic about the mark, almost ritualistic, as if it were a vestige of a presence that did not belong to the physical world. Lisa Ferrel, upon entering, almost couldn't keep standing. She said she felt a vacuum, as if someone had torn time out of there. Helen Granger, who appeared minutes later, stared fixedly at the wall and whispered, "It's not the first mark, and it won't be the last." Then, without saying anything else, she handed Ethan an old cassette tape, saying only, "Someone needs to hear this, but not alone." On the other side of the hospital, Jared Collins remained silent, sitting on a stretcher with his eyes fixed on a window covered in rain. When Lisa asked if he was okay, he just replied, "They won't stop calling my name." Dr. Ethan Moore took the cassette tape to the old medical records room, one of the few still equipped with analog devices. The tape was labeled with just a number, 413, no date, no patient name, no additional notes. The recorder clicked upon starting playback, with intense metallic background noise, as if the tape were scratched or had been recorded in a saturated environment. At first, nothing but static. Then, slowly, sounds began to emerge. Water dripping, dragging footsteps, what sounded like an old hospital bell ringing at irregular intervals. And then, a hoarse female voice echoed softly, "Everyone has arrived. Everyone is sitting." Rachel Ayers, sitting beside Ethan, widened her eyes. She recognized the voice, but couldn't identify who it belonged to. The silence that followed was interrupted by another recording, now of overlapping voices murmuring names of patients already deceased. Among them, she identified Mr. Blake, who passed away 2 weeks prior after a long coma, and Mrs. Hartley, who died of cardiac arrest months before. The tape seemed to list the dead, as if someone had recorded a roll call in a low voice, patient by patient, bed by bed. Lisa Ferrel, who was also listening, had an involuntary spasm upon hearing her own name whispered in the middle of the list. She demanded to turn off the recorder, but Ethan paused it. He wanted to understand. Helen Granger entered the room at that moment, and without being called, said, "Those voices were not recorded with a machine. They were pasted there, as if sticking to time." On the other side of the hospital, Jared Collins was locked in one of the storage rooms. He reported over the radio that he was listening to the tape, even without having the recorder. He said he heard the roll call inside his own head, with the voices getting closer and closer, repeating, "Jared, Jared, Jared," and then, at the end of the tape, a final whisper, which seemed recorded very close to the microphone. "The doctor needs to see." The following dawn, the ICU wing monitoring detected movement in empty beds. The system did not alarm, it simply recorded. Cameras showed nothing but tidied beds and shut-off monitors, but the central panel's thermal sensors displayed vague forms, sitting in specific positions, as if invisible patients had returned to their places of origin. There were exactly 12 forms. None of them coincided with current patients. Dr. Ethan Moore, determined to verify personally, entered the ICU with Rachel Ayers and Lisa Ferrel. The environment was freezing, enough to make breath form mist. even with the climate control system shut off. The lights were fluctuating. There was no sound at all, not the traditional beeps of the monitors. Just a dense, vibrant silence. Helen Granger was standing at the door, not entering, whispering something the others couldn't hear. When Ethan approached bed 6, where Mr. Blake had been, he felt an invisible resistance in the air, as if something occupied the space, something that pressured the environment. Lisa, face pale, said, "They are sitting exactly like before, as if waiting for someone to speak." Rachel squeezed Ethan's arm. "Did you hear that? They whispered my name." At that moment, Jared appeared in the hallway, pale and panting. He said he had dreamed of this scene, exactly as it was now. In the dream, one of the patients stood up and walked towards him, with their face completely erased. Ethan wanted to stop the investigation there, but Helen took a step forward and spoke with a grave voice. "They are waiting for the final call." The monitor screens lit up simultaneously, displaying only a black background with a flashing white name. Ethan Moore. Lisa fainted. Rachel screamed. And what followed was the unanimous feeling among everyone that they were being evaluated, not by the living, but by an assembly of the dead. Activate the little bell, because there are things that happen in the early morning hours, and only those with the alert turned on can see it firsthand. Immediately following the collective outburst inside the ICU, Dr. Ethan Moore ordered an immediate review of the security cameras and sensor records. Jared Collins was the one who accessed the main server files, with Rachel Ayers and Lisa Ferrel observing. What they found was more disturbing than the event itself. The entire recording between 03:00 AM and 03:17 AM was missing. Not corrupted, simply non-existent. The file jumped from 02:59 direct to 03:18. No technical explanation was able to justify it. Lisa suggested that this could be a collective psychic phenomenon, a shared episode of hysteria, but Jared, who was still trembling while reviewing the tapes, showed data that discarded the hypothesis. The internal clock of the security central, which was automatically synchronized via satellite, marked 03:08 for more than 7 minutes before advancing. Time, literally, stood still. Helen Granger, with an air more serious than ever, entered the technical room at that instant and said, "Their time is different, and yesterday, it mixed with ours." Ethan, reluctant to accept any non-scientific explanation, tried to contact the hospital administration, but the lines had been dead since the power outage. There was no cell signal, and all devices were strangely drained, including the digital wristwatch he always wore. Rachel found something even stranger. The recording from the previous night, which should have been intact, now appeared with an altered file name, Reunio Zo1 UTI, Meeting Zo1, ICU, and instead of video, it contained only distorted audio. A female voice repeated the names of the 12 dead patients who had passed away there in the last 3 months. At the end of the recording, a new voice, hoarse and metallic, said, "Conference open. 5 are missing." Lisa closed the laptop violently. Ethan remained silent. Jared wept quietly. Helen merely said, "The next meeting has already begun." The next morning, with the dawn filtering through the dusty windows of the North Corridor, the hospital began returning to normal operation. Technicians partially restored power, and some cell signals began to flicker. Dr. Ethan Moore, still skeptical, tried to rationalize everything as a great misunderstanding, a side effect of stress, insomnia, and isolation. However, something interrupted this brief return to normality. Lisa Ferrel accessed old ICU charts looking for the names or physical characteristics of the 12 patients who reportedly had been seen gathered. With Rachel's help, they cross-referenced death data and previous shifts. One by one, they were able to visually confirm the faces seen that dawn, with one single exception. One of the men seen standing in the corner of the conference room was never listed in any chart, admission, death, or triage of the intensive care wing. He was not a known patient, was not listed in any emergency report, nor had he been transferred. His face, however, was perfectly recorded in Jared's and Rachel's memories. Tall, extremely pale skin, glassy eyes, and a rigid posture, as if he were eternally waiting for an order. Ethan, seeking some plausible explanation, requested old footage from the surveillance cameras near the morgue. To his shock, this same man appeared, observing from afar each of the removals of bodies of ICU patients for weeks without ever being confronted, questioned, or even noticed by other employees. In the last image recorded of him, his silhouette merged into the gloom of the hallway, as if he were about to disappear into the wall. Lisa called him the one who gathers. Rachel, looking at the black and white image, murmured, "He was waiting for us." In the corner of the monitor, a message began to blink without apparent command. Meeting No 2 ICU, conference scheduled. Meeting No 2 ICU, conference scheduled. Helen Granger, the janitor of the North Wing, was known for her almost absolute discretion. For years, she cleaned the ICU hallways without ever getting involved in long conversations. Some said she had a sixth sense for predicting when patients were about to depart. Others thought she just paid attention to details that everyone else ignored. That morning, after the events that shook the night shift employees, Helen appeared before her usual time, entering through the emergency door with her old flashlight and a portable radio hanging on her shoulder. Without anyone asking, she went directly to the staff restroom and sat down before Dr. Ethan Moore and Lisa Ferrel, who were reviewing charts. With a low and firm voice, Helen began to speak. She said that in the last 3 weeks, she had heard whispers coming from the isolation wing, even when all patients there were already dead. Voices that seemed to call by names of doctors and nurses, asking for a new chance. She also mentioned that, on the night before the storm, she found a notebook that was not there in the previous shift. A diary with disconnected annotations about meetings, data collections, and incomplete answers. The pages were yellowed, and some pages had been torn out. Helen told that, in that dawn, she saw the same figure that Rachel and Jared described. The man who was not listed in any record. But she saw him from behind, with arms raised as if conducting a silent assembly. She described a sound impossible to reproduce. The dry crack of ribs breaking, repeated in synchrony, coming from the empty beds. Before leaving, Helen left something on the table. It was a loose page from the diary. In shaky letters it read, "Meeting postponed. Participants incomplete. Return when everyone hears." The woman stared at them one last time and said, "You think you are the only ones observing, but you have been called for a long time. You just didn't know." She slowly moved away down the hallway, letting the silence close behind her. Have you ever gone through any similar experience in a hospital, ICU, or something involving deceased people? Comment down below. Your story might appear in one of the next videos. Helen knows things that we can't even imagine, right? But what about you? What are you thinking about this gathering of the dead? Have you ever felt something strange or an inexplicable presence in a hospital? Comment down below your theory about what was really happening in that ICU. I love reading what you guys think about these cases. At 06:47 a.m., after more than 7 hours in the dark, electrical power returned to the hospital. The moment should have brought relief, but the impact was the opposite. The wing's fluorescent lights turned on with an intermittent buzz, revealing an ICU disfigured by the night's chaos. Monitors flickered out of rhythm. Some beds were empty, others, inexplicably, with deep marks on the mattresses, as if someone were still lying there a few minutes ago. Dr. Ethan Moore was the first to react, running to check the records on the digital terminals. The files from the last 12 hours were corrupted, and security cameras stopped exactly at 11:11 p.m., the minute the storm hit its peak. Beside him, Rachel Ayers just observed the beds. The same sensation of living absence hung in the air. Nothing had been touched, and yet, everything seemed out of place. In the medication room, Jared Collins found something that made him recoil with suspended breath. All the tags of the dead patients were arranged on the counter in alphabetical order, even those of bodies that had already been transferred. Beside them, there was an audio tape, hand-labeled, "Conference, Part 1. Jared pressed play on the small portable recorder they used for clinical notes. Silence. Then, footsteps. And then, a sound no one expected. The voices of the dead patients talking among themselves, like in a clinical meeting. Recognizable voices, even with noise, asking about treatments, commenting on the weather, debating something that sounded like next phase. Lisa entered the room while Jared was still holding the recorder, and the two looked at each other without being able to speak. In the background, the sound of a voice emerged clearer. Next on the list, Ethan Moore. At that instant, Ethan appeared in the doorway, with the semblance of someone who already knew. By the end of that morning, the hospital was slowly returning to its usual pace. Power company technicians inspected the generators, directors circulated trying to understand what had happened, and family members began to arrive. But inside the ICU, the atmosphere remained unchanged, heavy, contained, as if time were still suspended between the ventilators and the white curtains. Rachel Ayers, still without changing her sweaty and crumpled uniform, walked to the central record station with the intention of reviewing the data of patients who had passed away in the last 2 months. The impulse came from an absurd but uncontrollable intuition. Something Helen Granger's voice had said earlier echoed in her mind. Not everyone goes away when they die. In the digital system, despite the failures and corrupted files, one entry caught attention. A record created at 03:47 a.m., exactly at the time everyone reported the conference, was listed under an old internal code, not used for years, UTI Ghost 04. The chart listed names of patients already dead, but all marked as under observation, stable. At the end of the document, there was a new insertion, dated 10 minutes before the light came back. Last meeting finalized. Await new protocol. Dr. Ethan Moore was called and remained silent for long minutes before the screen. His breathing became slower, as if he recognized that, or part of that. Upon being questioned by Lisa about the meaning of the code, he answered with a single sentence, without looking into anyone's eyes. It was how we labeled terminal patients in tests of experimental protocols back in the 90s. But this code was abolished following allegations of ethical irregularities. Helen Granger, who until then had her back turned around and completed without being questioned. They never accepted the end. They are trying to follow the plan. If you got this far, it's because you felt the weight of this story as much as we did. So share it with someone you know who perhaps needs to understand that reality is sometimes stranger than it seems. The storm passed, the power was restored, and life at St. Vincent Memorial Hospital in Ohio moved on. But not all those involved came out of that night the same way they entered. Dr. Ethan Moore requested a transfer days later, claiming burnout, although he left a handwritten index card in his locker with the words, "They were talking among themselves. They knew who they were. They knew they were dead." Rachel Ayers still works in the ICU, but avoids entering alone during the early morning hours. She claims that sometimes the monitors trigger in sequence at 03:47 a.m., even with the beds empty. Jared Collins changed departments and refuses to comment on what happened. As for Dr. Lisa Ferrel, she's been discreetly investigating old files related to code UTI Ghost 04, but states that many of the documents vanished after a mysterious fire in the physical medical records warehouse. Regarding Helen Granger, the janitor, well, she just continues her work as she always did, walking through the north wing with a battery-powered radio attached to her waist. When questioned if she still hears voices, she just smiles and replies, "Not all voices are to be answered." Nothing was officially recorded. No report mentions the meeting nor the silhouettes observed in bed 06. The official explanation was electrical failure and collective hallucination induced by sleep deprivation. But if all that was just imagination, how to explain the entry into the system with exact date and time? How to justify the tapes found by Helen in storage, all with blank recordings, but ambient sound captured at a sub-auditive frequency? And why did the ICU cameras stop exactly at 03:47 a.m. and only return at 04:17 a.m., as if something had been interrupted? We have told here the most faithful version possible of those involved. Now it is up to you to reflect. And if there are places where death just changes the meeting from a room to an endless hallway, would you have the courage to enter an abandoned ICU during the early morning hours? Comment below. What do you think really happened that night? And which abandoned hospital would you like us to investigate in the next video? The camera advances slowly down the central corridor of the hospital's north wing. The fluorescent lights flicker in sequence, one by one, as if lighting up at the touch of something invisible. The ambient sound is almost imperceptible, just the buzz of electricity, interspersed with a slight noise of wind, which shouldn't be there. In the background, the ICU double doors are half open. There are signs of moisture on the walls, as if the storm had passed through inside as well. On the wall clock, CO347. The narrative overlays the ambient sound with the voice of Dr. Ethan Moore in an old recording. If they were really there, then we were never alone. And perhaps, we never will be again. The image cuts to Rachel Ayers sitting in the break room, staring fixedly at the cardiac monitor, which, for no reason, displays a pulsing line. She doesn't move, just observes. Jump cut. A security camera shows bed 06. The bed is empty, but the monitor displays a weak heartbeat, as if someone still breathed there. Final cut. A low-resolution freeze frame shows a figure in the corner of the room, blurry, motionless, watching. Static image, 1 second, 2, 3. The screen slowly darkens, and the soundtrack takes on a grave melody, composed of sub-frequency noises and spaced-out breaths. The video ends with the following phrase centered, in white letters: "Some sleep with the light on, others sleep with their eyes open." Well, we've come to the end of another account, and I really wanted to know your sincere opinion. What do you think that entity was? Comment down below, because I make it a point to read all your comments. And take the opportunity to tell me where you are watching from. What's your country, state, and city? I want to know how far our channel is reaching. If you have any suggestion of a real horror story that happened to you or in your city, send it to me. Who knows, maybe it becomes the theme of our next video. And look, don't go away just yet. I've set aside 2 videos here on the screen that are just as bizarre as this one. Every story on the channel is unique and edited with all care for you. Click on one of them and we'll see you there. Thanks for everything, family, and until the next mystery.